York to the world. Subscribe now to the Hot 97 YouTube channel. It's Ebro in the Morning with Laura Stiles and Rosenberg.
It's Ebro in the Morning. Laura Stiles, Rosenberg. Give it up for my family. Lurie Favors.
Lurie.
What's the channel you're on? SiriusXM every day.
I am on SiriusXM channel 126 Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. Eastern Time. Every day talking racial justice, social justice, activism, and how we make it all relevant to the people.
And your profession, what you studied is you are an attorney.
I am an
and
attorney.
you are a civil rights attorney.
I am. I prefer to call it racial justice attorney.
Okay,
because
why?
it's a little bit more encompassing than civil rights. I recognize that not all of our solutions will come through the legal system. So the social justice and the activism part, for me, is more captured by the racial justice approach.
And today, for the audience watching, Lurie's husband and I went to high school together.
Yes.
We were also in the R&B group together.
Yes.
So we'll get to some of those fun
Tomorrow's
times
answer.
after we deal with the business.
That's right. That's
She
right.
knows about tomorrow's answer. She
course.
got video and photos.
But guess
I've
what?
seen it.
First, we need today's answers. You know what I'm saying?
That's
Before
right.
we can get to tomorrow's.
There you go. There you
I
go.
like that transition. That was good.
Thank you.
The other part I think that's interesting before we get into what's on the ballot.
Yeah.
And why it's on the ballot and people getting out to vote. I think people should know more about your organization, Sankofa,
Yes.
as well as the work that you and my brother Brian have been doing since college around social justice, dealing with white supremacy, dealing with white supremacists being under attack by white supremacists, and all of the work that you guys did even before today. Because I think sometimes people think, oh, she went to school and she's a big smart attorney, and now she don't really know what's going on in the streets.
Yeah, no, we live in them streets. We've been doing this for a minute. As I like to say, we are not new to this. We are true to this. And the work that we started back in college years ago, basically is the work that we do now. Sankofa is a West African symbol from the Akan people. And it literally means you have to go back to the past to understand how we got to where we are today, especially if you plan on building for the future. And so we do that work through a racial justice lens. And we have been creating educational platforms. We have what I like to call white supremacist anonymous recovery circles. They're really discussion circles for Black people who are dealing with internalized white supremacy, dealing with white supremacy on the job, in the workplace, in their family spaces. And it is a safe space for people of African descent to come and deal with the challenges that we face. We've been doing that for 20 years. And that work really bleeds into the work I do as the executive director at the Center for Law and Social Justice, which is based at the Medgar Evers College at the City University of New York. So this has been sort of a through line for my entire adult life. And the work I do as an attorney is really just an extension of the activism that we were engaged in from the time I was before a freshman in college. So, yeah.
So now today you're making sure that people get out. The NYC Racial Justice Commission.
Yes.
Tell us, they run commercials on Hot 97.
Thank God.
So they're spending money to let people know that they exist.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
This commission was started under de Blasio.
It was.
Yes.
And really, this commission, to be real frank with y'all, this commission was started because of the protests in 2020. Now, y'all remember what was happening in the spring of 2020. We were hearing for the first time Ahmaud Arbery, who was chased down by racist vigilantes. We were hearing Breonna Taylor, who had been gunned down in her room, in her home, in the dead of night as she was roused from sleep by a no-knock warrant. And we heard the name George Floyd, who we saw being lynched on video for more than 9 minutes as police officers squeezed the breath out of his body while we were dealing with a pandemic that was literally squeezing the breath out of our bodies. And people responded not just with one day of protest, not just with a weekend of protest, but it was week after week, month after month. More than 26 million people took to the streets in every single state in this nation to protest what they saw as a continuation of racial injustice. We had people doing book clubs, and they were like going into schools talking about
because people had time.
All they were doing was trying to dodge the Rona, right?
That's
They
right.
were just trying to avoid getting sick. And Bill de Blasio, like many city leaders, he took 3 steps, 2 of which I kind of laughed at, and I'll be perfectly honest, I snickered at. The first was to paint Black Lives Matter on the streets. Do you guys remember that?
Yep.
We had Black Lives Matter, it was this whole thing.
Big mural talk everywhere.
Yes.
Everybody loved the mural.
I was like, oh, that's so cute. We're going to have a more pretty city, because I, as much as anybody, love a good Black Lives Matter sign. But then he took it a step further, and he said, we're going to make Juneteenth a city holiday. And people forget that because the federal government quickly came in and was like, oh, no, we got this. We are going to make Juneteenth a federal holiday. So people forget.
We actually went out to the first Juneteenth
That's
in the
right.
cold. We went out there
that?
with the mayor and his wife and
That's
did
right.
our Juneteenth thing.
That's
yeah.
right. That's right. So we were like, okay, that's sweet. I mean, I'll take another holiday. It's fine.
Right.
But that is
Day
not
off,
structural
too?
change. Exactly. That is not structural change. That is not dealing with the racial inequalities that had people. It's symbolic. The third thing he did, this was a game changer, because the third thing he did was to create a racial justice commission. Full disclosure, I'm one of the commissioners. And when I first heard about it, I was like, y'all gonna solve white supremacy? Like, y'all gonna create a commission to like solve racism? And I laughed. And when they called me from the mayor's office, I was like, for real? Like, are you serious about this? And you want me? Because you know how I talk and you know how I present. You know what I stand for. Like, this is serious. You really want me in this space? Because if so, we're going to have some real conversation. And he was basically like, that's why we wanted you among the other 10 commissioners who were selected to represent the city. So we joined the commission. I'm still mad doubtful because I'm like, all right, come on. What are we really doing here? But we basically had over a year where we heard from thousands of New Yorkers. We had hearings in every single borough, virtually, in person, where people were coming out and testifying about the role that white supremacy, that racism in government, not just personal interactions, but in government, how it was negatively impacting their lives. And we heard from subject matter experts and people who were, brilliant in their field, who had thought through these things from a very substantive perspective, policy perspective, and a few things became clear. Number one, we can't create just one good program to solve racism. Number two, we can't just create nice policies to solve racism. We have to deal with the way that racism permeates our government. And so that's what we did. We had the power as a commission to change the city charter. Y'all know the Constitution. It runs how the nation, it sets up our rules for how the nation runs.
Every state, the federal government, the state, the cities, they all have their own charter or constitution.
That's right. So our city charter is hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages long. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of provisions. And we could literally spend the next 10 years going through each one to figure out, well, how does racism show up in sanitation? And how does racism show up in NYPD? And that would take forever. We don't have that time because our commission ends next Tuesday at the end of Election Day. So what we did instead was we came up with 3 ballot proposals. Those are the ballot proposals that the commission is running ads on Hot 97 and other places that will basically fundamentally change the way that government deals with issues of racism in this city from now in perpetuity, if New Yorkers vote for them.
So we'll get to the voting part, but let's start on the 3. Give us the 3 provisions that are being proposed.
So the first one is a preamble. And a preamble, you guys know in the Constitution, it talks about why we have to have a Constitution, why we had to break away from Britain. And it kind of recounts the story of how America got its start from a very European perspective. But then it says, we believe that everyone deserves life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. It kind of sets out a vision statement. We don't have one of those in the city Constitution. And so there's no guiding statement for how government should act. And so the preamble, if New Yorkers vote yes on this proposal, the preamble basically is a statement that acknowledges, this city was created on stolen land with stolen African labor. We got Central Park sitting right on top of Seneca Village where black people used to be until they were driven out. And we've got the African burial ground. We've got all of this in our history. And as a result of that history, this is what I like to call the Sankofa approach, going to what we were talking about earlier. This causes government to take a Sankofa approach. They got to look to the past to consider the racism that is in that history. And then when they're making future governing decisions, they have to factor that history in. So as opposed to governing in a way that says, well, the wealthy always win, so the wealthy just gonna keep winning, the government would, if New Yorkers vote yes on this proposal, have to now consider that history and then strive to reach the decision that's gonna be more equitable. It's never been done before. It sounds really lawyery and wordsy, and it is, but the reality is it would guide how city government makes decisions going forward.
Well, because any decision, if you've worked in any place of business, the government's a business, when you make decisions on that business, you start with what the reason you're in business.
That's right. That's
right. The reason we're here is to achieve X goal. And so if that's what we're trying to do, then all the decisions that we make go to that goal.
Right.
And so this charter, which is the business paperwork of the city, would now set forth something that people have to adhere to when they make decisions.
Right. And that's huge because I was talking to one of the editorial boards and they were like, well, don't we always think about racial justice and equity? We've got a black woman who's the chief of police. We got a black chancellor.
Symbolic. All symbolic.
And I laughed because it's like, are you really trying to suggest that having black people in positions of power in institutions that have historically been anti-black, that alone is enough to produce racial equity? That's laughable.
But for people who don't, because most people don't understand how decisions get made, or the inner workings of even white supremacy, right? Because it's very deep, right?
Yeah.
That is enough.
That is. And
because they don't know anything else.
I had to push back on it because I was like, we will accept diversity and we'll accept racial justice if it's a part of something else. But we ain't striving for it. Like, ain't nobody striving to make governing decisions that are going to make all of us live a more equitable life. That doesn't happen. So if New Yorkers were to vote yes on this proposal, then that would fundamentally shift the way that government has to consider their decisions.
And what's part two?
Part two is my favorite. I'm sorry. I know I'm not supposed to have favorites because I'm a commissioner, but this is my favorite one. Part two, the second proposal would create a racial equity plan mandate. So think about all the city agencies that we have to deal with right now. Sanitation, MTA, NYPD, the mayor's office. We have over 50 agencies in New York City. And if New Yorkers vote yes on this proposal, then every single city agency would have to create a baseline report that says, this is how we have done with our racial equity in the past. So sanitation, are you really picking up trash in East New York the same way you picking it up on the Upper West Side? I don't know. What does the data tell us? And that baseline report says, that's a huge one. We talked about trash cans the last time I was here with the census and the inequitable access to just sanitation. So the sanitation agency, in addition to all the others, would have to create this report that looks back at how they've done. And then every other year thereafter, they have to have a plan for what they're going to do to address the racial disparities and the inequities in the way that they last performed services.
So vote yes on 2.
I can't tell you how to vote. I'm just saying, as a black woman in the city, I'm voting yes.
Okay, vote yes on 2.
And then
Are there names for these proposals?
There are names, but they're boring and lawyerly.
Okay.
So
Okay.
it's
The
valid.
numbers 1, 2, and 3, Laura.
Right.
Okay. All right.
Nice.
And these will be when you go to vote in New York City.
In New York City.
Or you're in your early voting now, which if you do that, where do you go to find your place?
You can go to vote.org. You can go to many.
Find my poll site.
That's a great one.
.vote.nyc.
Yeah.
And if you go to nyc.gov/racial justice, you can literally read every single one of these proposals. Every
And
single
so
one.
then when you get to your ballot,
Yes.
will it say the NYC Racial Justice Commission and these are the things, or what does it say?
It will be on the other side of the ballot. So
On the
you're going to
back.
get on the one side, you're going to get to choose all your candidates, the king and queens who will then rule for the next set of years. I like to call them king and queens. That's what they are. On the other side is you'll actually see the racial justice ballot provisions and proposals. And there's actually even a fourth statewide proposal for environmental justice. We ain't even talked about that one yet.
Okay.
So we'll get to that. And the reason she likes to call them kings and queens is because she's what's the word I'm looking for?
Because I'm a realist. Because we this is one of the few countries where you get to pick the people who are the king and the queen. In a country with the king or the queen, do you have clean water or not? That depends on what the king or the queen said. Do you have hospitals that stay open or close down in your communities or not? That depends on the king or the queen. Do you have grocery stores in every community? Well, what the king or the queen say? Here, those people are called elected officials, but they have the same power. And when we don't vote for them...
But I thought the queen didn't have power.
Well, she's a figurehead queen.
Yeah,
it's a
right.
real monarchy we're talking about. And
But
all I'm saying is somebody has some power to collect all them billions of dollars.
That's right.
All right. So we went
so
to 1
the third
and 2.
part. What's the third
The
part?
third one, and actually, let me just on number 2 really quickly. In addition to that racial equity plan, it would also create a racial equity officer, like a CEO of racial equity, so that all the agencies ain't just doing their own little thing all
Somebody's
over the place.
overseeing it.
Coordinated.
Ebro.
Yeah, there you go. Ooh, you could do that.
No, I'm good. Number 3.
Number 3 is Isaiah's favorite one, my voting rights coordinator, who is here with me. It is the true cost of living. Quick question. How much y'all think it costs for a family of 4 to live in New York City?
Cost, like how much do they need to make or how much do they spend?
How much do they need to make in
How
order
much
to
do they
live in
need
New
to
York
make a
City?
family of 4? I would say
Family of 4.
$120,000.
That's so sweet. What about the rest of you? What would you say?
I'm gonna say $200,000.
$200,000?
Yeah, I'm going to go with 200 also.
Okay, so as a family of 4, I would agree with all of those and higher. However, in the city of New York, if you are a family of 4, you make $28,750, you're not considered poor enough to get access to the governmental services that we
what?
provide. Exactly. That is the
28,000?
federal number.
Wait, the
if
federal
you make
number?
the federal number for a family of 4, if you make
Disgusting.
more than $29,000 as a family of 4, you're not considered poor enough to get access to most of the government services that we have in this city.
Family
That's
of
the
4,
cost of living.
$29,000.
Yeah.
Imagine
You're
that.
not living. You're
Before
in a shelter.
taxes? That's before taxes?
Listen, I don't care if it's after taxes. I don't care if it's after whatever, but that is the reality.
It's
And
a huge
so,
struggle because
yeah.
most people, and I've read a lot about this, they're not poor enough
Right.
to get help.
Exactly.
Right? Is that the
Exactly.
working poor combo that we have?
Yes, the working poor.
And
Yes.
frankly, the middle class, because middle class in this city is basically working poor, if we're being
Right.
honest about it. So this proposal, if you vote yes, then this proposal would cause the city to have to use the real cost of living, which is, according to the numbers that they suggest, this is still lower than what I say, closer to $96,000. But all of you know how much higher than that you actually
explain.
mentioned.
So the first number you gave,
Yeah.
28,000.
That's what
you
we
said there's a
currently
federal
use.
number.
Yeah, that's what
How
we
did they come up
currently
with that
use.
number?
It's a function of government. It's a function of looking at the average medium income, and it's a function of a number of factors that don't actually translate to real life.
One I was going to say may not translate to New York City.
But that's the number for all of us across the country.
But that's my
yeah.
point. So this part 3 that people should vote for is now looking at numbers based on New York City.
Exactly. And that would be the number that government would have to consider when they're thinking about policy, when they're thinking about budgets, when they're thinking about who needs housing access. And I mean, if we're trying to really be serious about closing the racial wealth gap, we have to be honest about where the racial wealth gap is coming from. And if you are a family of 4 making $35,000 a year and you're too poor to get help, you're never closing the racial wealth gap. You can't even close the gaps in your windows and keep the heat in the house.
You can't even close the gap under the door.
No,
You can't afford to buy a shirt at the Gap.
And so, boom, when you go vote, everybody watching this, we were talking the other day about how the governor election going on at the state level,
yeah.
You can tell that they don't really, they care, but a lot of people in New York City don't come out and vote for the governor.
Yeah,
they don't come
that's
out
true.
and vote in this midterm election. You can tell by how the kind of conversation it even is around governor, right? It's a
Yeah.
lot about upstate. It's a lot about other things. And I think that kind of takes the conversation, like people aren't paying attention to midterms in this way right now.
Yeah.
And
That's
double
a
whammy.
mistake.
And I'm sorry,
No.
Hillary, and also double whammy because Hochul inherited the job.
Right.
So there's a little bit less motivation in the sense that people never ran out and voted for her.
And she's a woman,
And-
so
well,
there's
and of course
also
she's
that.
a woman.
There's also that.
She's not, and she hasn't been super loud.
And she's running with a black man.
Oh, with a Latino name. How dare she? Yeah.
I mean,
But that's a big mistake. We did this after President Barack Obama came out. And I get that people feel differently about elections, but when President Barack Obama won in 2008, the midterm elections were in 2010.
That's when
we had
everything went
massive
left.
voter suppression, and the Republicans were able to basically take the House and the Senate at the federal level, which meant that all the judges who were getting considered had to get Republican approval. All the policies that were getting passed had to get Republican approval. And if you have seen how Republicans have operated, I'm not trying to be partisan. These are just the facts. There was a baby formula shortage. They voted against allowing the Democrats to issue more baby formula. People were getting stimulus checks, $300 some odd per child, because Democrats recognize that people are poor and need resources. Republicans voted to end that. They have voted to end voting rights. They have voted to make sure that when people were getting kicked out of their homes during the pandemic, that they did not get subsidies and supports that would allow them to stay in their homes. So when we see what people have done, and we know that they have said that if they come into power as a result of November, there's going to be a national abortion ban issue. They're looking at banning birth control. So not only are we going to ban your ability to end a pregnancy if you need to, but we're also going to prevent your ability from getting pregnant in the first place. This is what they stand for. And when we don't come
And then
out
we're not
to
going to
vote,
give you any financial support once you got kids that you were forced to keep.
because there's no child care subsidies. There's no parental leave nationwide. We don't even have nationwide health care. You got hospitals in Georgia that are closing right now under Republican leadership. You have 82 counties in the state of Georgia that do not have access to an OBGYN. And we have a black maternal death rate that is the worst in the Black Belt all throughout the South. And when people don't come to vote and pick who gets to be the king, then no, you don't get a hospital. And it would be different if we did not live in a country where, unfortunately, we are surrounded by many, many sociopaths who do not believe that people who are not white should have access to the same privileges and power and resources. And they're voting to pick kings who are in line with that philosophy.
So on the voting part, a lot of people went out to protest. A lot of people and I'm sure you see a lot of people have something to say.
Yep.
They're on Twitter, they're talking, they're tweeting, they got problems with this leadership, they got problems with that leadership.
Yep.
However, why are the voting numbers so low?
Well, unfortunately, I've had a number of conversations recently with a lot of folks who was like, man, sis, I was in them streets in 2020. We was representing for George Floyd, which was wonderful and it was amazing. But I don't believe in electoral politics. And I have to ask, well, do you believe in your car? Like, do you believe in your refrigerator? Your car and your refrigerator are based on systems that work based on the machinations of how they were put together. Whether you believe in your car or not is irrelevant. Who gets to pick the king is determined by who comes out to vote. So you not believing in the electoral system, I mean, I think that's great for your moral space and where you are internally, but we're talking about who gets to decide whether or not you have clean water. Ask Jackson, Mississippi, if who sits in the seat of power matters, because they don't have clean water right now, ain't had it for months. Ask people who are in communities where there are no hospitals, whether or not it matters who gets to sit in the throne of power. This is not a moral question. And I said this during the census. This is not a space to have some of this internal questioning. Oh, I don't believe in the system. Like Morpheus told Neo, the truth exists independent of your belief. The system exists whether you believe in it or not. And again, if we were not competing with other voters who believe we should not have birth control, that we should not be able to have abortion, that we should not be able to have hospitals and healthcare and education, who believe in banning books because it allows them to preserve a white supremacist power structure, they're voting and they're picking kings and queens who will rule in line with that. So your belief, and then again, to be fair, perhaps people who are not voting, perhaps they have their own way of collecting sanitation, cleaning their water, populating their libraries, paying their teachers, paying for healthcare, getting hospitals and nurses. Maybe you've got an independent way to do that. If so, let me know, because the system will move. I will move to wherever you have set this up at, because you have been able to insulate yourself from the need to participate in the system. Me and Brian have many conversations about the need to leave the country.
Absolutely.
We ain't left yet. We are right here, and my children need clean water. That fourth proposal on the New York State ballot, that's the only statewide ballot proposal. Should we invest $4.2 billion in clean air and dealing with climate change? Hell yes. I'm voting yes on all of that. But if you believe in clean water, but you're not going to pick the king and the queen and the policies that will believe in clean water for you, where are we going? Because you obviously have another place for us to be, and I would love to be there with you. I would love to know how to get there.
I have to ask you this because I'm excited. You're so fucking smart.
Thank
and you nail everything that, like, in such a better way. Ebro and I try, but your words just. So how do you deal with the intentional confusion that we see constantly? The question that gets me so, like, my brother and I were discussing this last night. It wraps my head in circles, and even answering it's hard. The Democrats were the party of slavery.
Oh yeah, they were.
They were.
Yeah.
Let's try to twist up this. Being a Democrat is not being a free thinker. You're just falling in line with what, as a smart person, please tell me what the response to this conversation is.
So racism does not have a political party. And just like people, love the founding fathers, most of them were slave owners, regardless of the political parties that they live in. Racism does not have a religious specificity. It exists in all of these spaces. There was a time when the Democrats were the party of the slavers. That is crystal clear. There was a time when the Republicans were the party of civil rights and promoting that. How things change. So for me, it's not about having a permanent party. It's not even about having permanent friends or enemies. It's about permanent issues. And my issue is racial justice in a society that was built on the stolen land of the indigenous and their genocide and the trafficking of millions of African people to work for free for the entirety of their lives so that white people could have access to privilege and power, which was never supposed to end. So I don't really care what party is the party of white supremacy today, because I know that could change tomorrow. I do care about whether or not you're going to support the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act and make sure that there is accountability for police officers. Democrats happen to support that today. Republicans don't. Democrats support baby formula today. Republicans. So for me, it's very clear. What are we dealing with now? What are the parties promoting now? And yeah, we know that they can switch. And when they switch, we switch too. Black people used to be Republicans. Like, we are now Democrats because the Democrats are just so happen to be the party that is advocating policies that are in our best interest. We're very smart voters when we think about it, even though we get bamboozled quite a bit.
And that's why I asked. I'm not going to be able to repeat that, but it was really, that's what I just needed.
Well, I think, and these are all pieces of conversations that we have often, right?
Yeah.
I think you have them often, and I'm sure, do you consider yourself in the business of conversion? Are there individuals that you work to convert to understanding the words that are coming out of your mouth, or do you present them and then leave them to their own devices?
I present them, and then I ask, actually, before I do anything, I ask them what they care about. Because if I come into a room and I'm like, y'all gotta vote, your ancestors died for you to vote, you gotta vote. Don't nobody wanna hear that. Like, you try to do that in a high school classroom or even in a college classroom right now, you will get clowned out the room. But if I start a conversation with, well, what is the one thing, the two things in your community that you can't stand, the biggest form of injustice, and people will say things like, well, homelessness or violence or
potholes, trash.
Potholes, all of these things. And then I take the issue that they care about and I tie it to the electoral system. Oh, I don't like the way they teach in our schools. Oh, okay. Well, who picks the person who decides how they teach? Is that the chancellor? Yeah. Well, who picks the chancellor? The mayor? Oh, so did you vote for the mayor? Because the mayor's going to pick the person who decides how your kids get educated. You don't like how they police in your community? Oh, okay. Well, who decides how they police? Oh, the chief of police? Well, who picks the chief of police? Oh, the mayor. Oh, so if you don't like how they policing, but you didn't pick the king who could pick the person who decides how they going to police, well, then what are we really talking about? Do you really care? Or are we just sort of talking about things that we believe that should be changed, but we're not keyed into how this system allows us access to change?
So, and what you're talking about is doing the actual work to some degree, right? And so doing the actual work, actually reading, actually trying to inform yourself is usually where many people fall short.
It is.
Right?
Where the rubber meets the road.
If you will. And so in our society, and I think it plagues a lot of communities, they want to see someone talking that talk.
Yeah.
So they hear you and you like, yeah, we're talking that talk. You telling the truth. You're a truth teller. You know what I'm saying? They trust you, right? They know your background. They see your pedigree. They see themselves in you maybe.
Yeah.
Right? However, what's that thing to get them to actually want to do the work and not expect it to be done for them?
So for me, it comes to recognizing the difference between a king and queen mentality versus an enslaved mentality. And when you have an enslaved mentality, you are used to saying things like, well, what's your agenda for my community? That's a begging position. That's a please help me perspective. An empowered perspective says, here's the agenda that we have for our community that we just hired you to implement through our vote. We expect these 5 things to be accomplished. These 2 over here are negotiable, but this is what we want done. And if you don't do it, you will get fired in the next election. That's an empowered perspective. So for people who are thinking about this from, well, what have they done for me? The real question is, what are you doing for you? Like, what are you? Because they don't like you. We know
We've
that.
Established that
we've
already.
established that. We got 400 years
Matter
of
of fact,
history.
they got
don't
systems
like
set
you.
up to put you in jail and kill you.
I mean, and then call you dumb and crazy and ban you from reading any books that could help you explain how you got into that condition. So we know they don't like you. Why are we fronting like they should like us? And are you going to be the queens of your space? Are you going to own more than just the blocks that we fight over that we don't actually own? We were talking about some of the violence that's happening at election sites across the country. I'm like, man, we got all these corner boys and bros and sisters who be out on the block protecting turf that they don't own. Imagine if they were protecting the elders who were trying to vote or protecting the young people who are trying to vote. But really, if we were having more of these conversations at the community level, at the block level, it's folks on my block who had lost the right to vote because they had been incarcerated, can't get certain jobs because they've been incarcerated. They are a fundamental and vitally important part of the community. And if I can work with them and organize with them so that they can begin involved in the solutions that their communities need, that's a voter soon. Like they are going to turn the rest of the block out in terms of civic engagement, because when the block is able to care for itself and understand how these systems work, the block will mobilize. And they do it all the time. We just don't often get to highlight it.
Let me ask you a question. In your expertise when it comes to demographics, what would you say is the demo that's actually voting locally, the highest amount?
Old people. Our elders, which is a beautiful thing. But here's something Isaiah, our voting rights coordinator, always says. If you're 18 years old and not voting, and there's an 88-year-old who is voting, the 18-year-old ideally is going to be living with the impact of that 88-year-old's vote for the rest of their life. The 88-year-old, God bless them, probably not going to be here to see the impact.
Right.
But right now, we have most of the older populations that are coming out to vote. It's the younger populations, unfortunately, that were often very, very active in driving policy on the ground. We just have to explain to them how, if you just protested and your protest isn't tied to a policy, then it was just kind of like a grown folks temper tantrum. Like, it really ain't gonna do nothing. I mean, it feels good. I'm down for a good protest. Give me some djembe jumps and a good chant. I'm with you. That's great. But if you're not tying it to something, then it's just a grown folk temper tantrum.
Right.
So we have one of our family members here on the show. He doesn't vote.
Yeah.
No, you don't start this now.
I think it's a great time.
Our other guests are already here. This could take an hour.
Yeah,
Well, I thought, maybe there was something that maybe she said. Now, like a lot of individuals that we see, specifically black men, who their machismo and ego and the things that they believe in supersede logical thinking sometimes. And so when logic and facts are presented, oftentimes they dig their heels in.
Yeah.
Right? Because otherwise they might feel like they look weak if they acquiesce to a woman, you know, God forbid, presenting, do you deal with that?
Of course. And so I would ask those brothers, you know, if that is your honest, your truly held belief, I would just ask them, you know, do you love your kids? Do you love the babies on your block? And have you found a way to solve the problems that the kids in your community are facing independent of government? Have you found a grassroots solution that's going to educate your kids, that's going to feed your kids, that's going to clothe them and house them in safe conditions? If you have found a way to do that, then that's fine. But if you haven't, I would just ask those brothers. And you still need
grants, and you still need financial support from the city, and you still need government aid for this program, and you still need hope. You still need all of these things.
Right. I would ask those brothers, do you love your kids enough to perhaps put your very passionate and sincerely held beliefs to the side and recognize that you can still believe that while you are able to basically ensure that you are using your vote. And let's be clear, voting ain't asking you to climb Mount Everest. Like, we ain't asking you to like go out and slay Goliath. You got to stand in line and make a decision about who should make decisions. That's it. We ain't asking you to give blood. Ain't no, you know, you ain't got to get a vaccine to vote. You don't have to do, like, we're not asking you to, for your firstborn. We're asking you to stand in line for 20 minutes and decide
By the way,
on a
not
piece
if you
of
vote
power.
early, you won't even have to stand in line.
Exactly.
You can
show up right now, nobody's there.
Exactly. So can you, for a moment, put your beliefs and recognize that we respect your beliefs, but that there is no other way for your kids to get what they need if you are not participating in the system today, right now. Now, maybe generations from now, cool, but how many, you know, young Kunta Kintes are going to get sacrificed in that process while we are figuring out how to make our independent spaces work? So I'm not mad at that. I respect it. I'm just saying, until you find a way to meet all the needs of your people independent of this system, hold those beliefs, hold your nose, go stand in line for 15 minutes, eat a Kit Kat bar while you're in line, fill out the little bubbles.
Sometimes they sell baked goods.
I was about to say, they might even have a donut hole with free coffee.
I'll tell you this right now, up in my neighborhood on the Upper West Side, where let me tell you, they love to vote. You got the baked goods, the cookies, brownies. The grandmas are out.
That's right. You said something, though. They love to vote.
Love it.
Because they recognize that this is how you get power to their community. This is how you extract resources. Now, we have not had a lot of that experience. We've only been voting since 1965. So from 1619 to 1965, that's like 340 some odd years. We could like die for having this conversation. People always be like, well, you want to hide something from a black person, put it in a book. As if like that's how we always were, without recognizing that we created Timbuktu. We created libraries, and libraries that taught the rest of the world how to read, how to think, how to understand. And yeah, it also happens that we had 340 some odd years where if we were caught with the book, we could die. Your kid could be stolen from you. Your eyes could be poked out. So it ain't just, oh, hide it in a book. There's a history here. There's a context. So we had 340 some odd years where we had to sneak out to the woods to have a conversation about how to follow the North Star and how to braid the baby's hair to put the map in the head texture and in the hairstyle so we could get to freedom. While our white colleagues were sitting in open rooms with lights on, having conversations about the budget and the committees and who's going to be on the ballot and what issues are going to be on the ballot. So it makes sense. All the resistance makes perfect sense. But if we're not enslaved anymore and we still ain't free, then that means that there is work yet to be done, and we have to do that work. And part of that work includes recognizing that this system has power over us. And if nothing else, them white nationalists, they voting. Them white supremacists,
they vote.
They voting. They are guarding election poll sites to block us from voting. So let's be clear, we are not the same. We do not have the same history. And the reality is our disenfranchisement has been scripted for us. So that resistance, that is a part of what we should expect after 340 some odd years of being threatened with death for even thinking about registering to vote, let alone being politically engaged. So I'm not mad at them, brothers. I just would hope that there's enough love in their heart, and I know that there is, for the people in their communities who are the most vulnerable. For the elders, right now you got Republicans talking about they're going to take Social Security. Like Social Security. My grandmother needed Social Security. My grandfather they work hard. You all heard President Barack Obama. He's like, they got broke backs because of that Social Security. They got chapped hands trying to get that Social Security. That is money that our elders, that we all pay into that system.
That was the original 401k for people who don't understand.
That was the original 401k. And they're
that
talking about
that was your
taking it.
pension.
And if you love the big mamas in your community, brothers, if you love the elders in your community, brothers, love them enough to make sure that they're going to not have to come up with an extra $1,000 each month that we all know we can't come up with in order to just eat real food and not cat food and end up struggling in poverty at the end of their days.
That's Lurie Favors. She's in my family.
Well, listen, I just want to tell you something right now. Make all the guests that you bring in this good. Because you bring some people who don't bring in like Lurie.
I got different type of family members. Lurie will tell you.
Lurie
will tell you, you know what I'm saying?
Lurie, you get straight to the point, and we appreciate
Yes, we love it. Thank you so much.
And check out on SiriusXM every day, 10 a.m. What channel?
Channel 126, Urban View. That's it.
Before you go, I know we have other guests here. Who's our next guest?
Division.
Oh, division. We gotta get into some R&B talk and their toxicity. We'll get into that. But they love to make fun of my backstory. Of my R&B group that I was in with your husband and
Tomorrow's Answer.
Tomorrow's Answer. Yes.
They even make fun of conscious vibes. They don't, you know what I'm saying? They make fun of me being on my conscious, you know what I'm saying, 1-2 from early.
They don't know the power of what that meant, what it meant to the people.
You know what I'm saying?
But you know what's funny? I actually got a little Tomorrow's Answer remix happening right now. My son put together a track, and they put together some rhymes.
Brian's still writing?
Listen, he's writing for the youth them, and the youth them have a nice little song that they putting together to get out the vote. So
I love that.
Tomorrow's Answer.
Send me the song.
I will do that.
Send me the song. Shout to Nas.
Yes.
Shout to Nia out there too. Your children.
Shout to Issa, baby girl.
And thank you for coming in.
Thank you
so
for
much
having
fire
me.
today.
I appreciate y'all.
Sean,
thank
you
y'all
voting?
for having these voting
Of
conversations.
course.
Sean, you voting?
I'm working right now for you.
Board's not going to run itself.
You know what I'm saying? I'm flying this plane, bro.
Yo, thank you. Give it up one time.
Thank you,
Lurie
guys.
Favors.
Appreciate you.
Go out there and vote. What's that? What's the site one more time?
Findmypollsite.vote.nyc.
There it goes.
That's it. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.